I'm going to talk today about learning. And it's not exactly the same way that Genera just spoke about it, but it is related because it is about learning from both mistakes and learning from successes, and also learning to pay attention to that which is in front of you, as well as the broader examples from around the world. So, rethinking how to be smart. Now, smart, what does that mean? Why do we use that term? I think all of you know, but I'll just sort of iterate a few things about it. But being smart can mean using technology to sort of have a feedback loop, especially in mobility systems, that the sort of, how the cars work and how they move at intersections, you actually have sensors and they track that and you learn from it. And your signals change. Or today, we have the cars that are learning from each other. And we have the whole interest in artificial intelligence as well, and sort of how that thinking becomes part of how a city works and how a city becomes smart. But one of the ways to be smart is really about understanding where we are and what we do and how we learn from it and how people have been doing. We've had feedback loops and ways of thinking and ways of learning in the way we move around a city and in the way we make places in the city, and the interrelationship between those two for a long time. And I think as much as we need to look forward to the role of technology and the role of great ideas from other places, we need to make sure that we look at the things we've already done and the types of group behaviors we've already adapted to making it all work. So let me show you a little bit about how this is. Now, when I think about how I've learned, both in the university and beyond, I think about knowing the world and knowing thyself is the second part. But I will tell you, almost the whole thesis of the Comprehensive Research University, which is what you are all part of, and how the type of institution where I was educated, and which is sort of the international model of higher education today, is that I'd say that one of the foundations of it is compare and contrast, and looking at all sorts of examples of the best practices from around the world, the best examples, the best parts of knowledge, and learning from them by holding them up to each other and comparing them. And that's an extremely useful thing to do, and I'm in no way dismiss that as part of my own work and as part of learning more generally. And I want to point out, also speak a little bit personally, that if you were raised in a household where from about age 12 you spent your free time, at least your paid free time, clipping, folding, pasting articles from journals around the world for your dad, who had the modest task of rating every single country in the world on a scale of 1 to 7 for civil and political liberties, you would get, the idea of compare and contrast would be kind of like just like breathing. And then when we were done with the world, we would shift to the United States and compare cultural regions. So I learned from age, I don't know, it just never ended. You either grow up with having had every single dinner table conversation about the differences between different cultural regions in the United States, or you don't. I grew up with it. And so on that matter, in case you were wondering, my dad wrote that Pittsburgh is more about the Mid-Atlantic than it is about the Midwest. Won't say the question. That eternal question is closed on that. You can look at it. I'll send you a link. But in any case, I grew up with the sense that that was what the most important part of learning was, that you just had to understand different practices and different norms around the world and compare them and see what was better, what was worse, what worked, what might apply here, what might not apply there. And I absolutely believe that, and it's also part of my job today. I work in the city of Pittsburgh, I worked in other places, and part of actually, frankly, why I'm here and why folks had hopes that I could do a good job here is because I did know a lot about a lot of different places, and I did know a lot. I had sort of the comparisons in my head, and that's something that I do continue to learn from and is rich. And I'm going to show you a little bit about that, a little bit about the compare and contrast world, just sort of run through it relatively quickly. So these are just a few cities. Now, in my life, these are cities that were both study trips and vacations, but the reality is that vacations are really never different. If I could be on the most beautiful beach in the world, and I'd be thinking about what the stormwater management policies were for the parking lot. It's just part of my life. And so it's sort of the busman's holiday theory. Like when I go to a new city, I ride transit to understand it. But that said, sort of some things to think about: connecting the city, reusing infrastructure, rebuilding patterns of the city, how we share space. Sort of a key element here is I'm going to talk about how our public realm of how we move is really also our most important shared space. and then topography and city building, all of which happen to be, and I don't know quite how it happened that almost everywhere I go seems to have steep topography and waterfronts, not unlike Pittsburgh, but you can learn from it. And let me show you a couple of things that I've learned that matter to me. I show this image not only as a kind of portrait of the existential dilemma of planners at large, of like, where are we going? Which direction? What should we learn here? But also that we did learn something very straightforward. When you look at this, just the fact that we could do all this movement in what is actually a very populous suburb near Tokyo, Setagoya, is that we were on the street walking. We were not being run down by cars. And it was like, oh, the New York area equivalent, you would be run down by cars in this situation. How did they do that? How are we going to learn from this? Now, Hong Kong is an extraordinary place in so many different ways, but one of the ways it's extraordinary is that they have an escalator which is sort of runs through the heart of the city and runs up to the hills, down to the main commercial decor, but then up to the hills, which is residential as well as some commercial activity. And that it is not just this is not a sort of tourist escalator. This is not just a bit of sort of high engineering frippery. This is actually integrated in the system of movement in the city. And it is also transformative in the way that people live and work there, and that they can actually move around the city without a car and cover significant distances that are not impossible on foot, but are an extraordinary effort on foot for people and would actually interrupt the flow of activity, both commercial and residential and recreational. Hong Kong is an intermodal archipelago. People take a ferry boat, then they take the bike to get home, and it's also an intergenerational. This is the nice thing about if your intermodality, that means shifting from one mode of transportation to another mode of transportation, if your intermodality is a ferry boat and a bicycle, you could be 8 or you could be 80, and you still get to do it. This one is one that's shared by generations. This is a similar kind of initiative in Metagene in Colombia, where the city is sort of not unlike some aspects of Hong Kong. It becomes so impenetrable to actually get up the hill and connect the people on the hill, which is what had been originally informal settlements and then changed into more formal settlements. But there was no way to get up. There was no way to get up, almost no way to get up on foot, because it was actually controlled by people, that sort of informal system, which would stop you and demand payment to actually continue up. And there was also impossible because the roads were like, goat paths that were very dangerous to move at any kind of speed. So they introduced a gondola system that would get you from the main transportation links and the main opportunities down below up to this area. And they also decided to monumentalize. You can only see it in the corner there. There's a library. The large forms are library buildings, because they wanted to make the point that the mobility that they were creating here was not just a physical mobility, but was also connected to a vision of social mobility. Because where you live and how you get to where you live and what your opportunities are actually can impact your opportunities to move into new jobs or new education, or even ultimately to another part of the city if you so chose. So this is a similar project also in Metagene, which is an outdoor escalator system in another neighborhood with many of the same challenges and solving the same problem, but instead of with a gondola, with an escalator, which worked there. Here, while there's no library, there was also the same monument to kind of social and active program of social mobility in a sort of social community structure at the top there, which is about empowerment and skill building, in addition to being at the head of an escalator service down to the transit and down to the connection to the rest of the city. This is Cape Town, the Bokap area, and I'm showing it here for we've been talking about topography and cities mobility, and so I can't help myself. I am going to talk compare and contrast and learn from the rest of the world in this talk, but we are getting to Pittsburgh very soon. But I just want to make the point. Sometimes, for all our ingenuity, whether by choice or whether by physical impossibility, you don't solve the problem. This community has a dead end running into a very beautiful piece of topography, but it's a dead end. And it's a dead end, and I just want to make the point, this is sort of maybe an obvious one, but dead ends in the way we live both provide opportunities for actually some enclaves, sometimes they're very attractive, but it also can have a relationship to that same question of social mobility, and that same question both where physical mobility and social mobility connect, and how we both form enclaves deliberately, and sometimes they're formed for us, whether by government policy or whether by economic forces. And that's something to think about when we see another street in Cape Town, which reminded me and brought home to me when I was there just how important it is to recognize that question of mobility and how we get around, which is so vital to our identity and how we operate in a city. So it's no surprise, really, not that it should come, no surprise that when it comes to actually wanting to make a protest, to move something, to join a movement in this case, this was particularly about the Americana massacre in 2012 at the time, is that stopping traffic is about the most, it's a symbolic act, but it's also a literal act, a physical act, which is saying something about this issue is so important that I'm going to stop movement. I'm going to stop the physical mobility of the city, which, again, not something that is, it depends where you land on a political spectrum, whether you always think this is a good idea, or whether you think it's a good idea for a baseball game, for a pirate game, closing the Clementi Bridge, which is a different type, not of protest, but is another type of shared street. But I wanted to put this up here because this is our realm, which has a function which is so multiple. It's not just about moving people, it's also about communication, and sometimes that communication means actually stopping people. This is the Gates Foundation, an entirely different universe, entirely different mode. This is Seattle. Now that was not Seattle, that's Paris. But this is Seattle, where that same, not a protest on the street, but this is the Gates Foundation, the wealthiest foundation in the world, a foundation which is dedicated to self-actualization of every single person on Earth. And they decided to use the street, this shared space, which is usually about mobility, not for a protest, not for advertising, which we're used to, but actually for communicating about their programs via video, and then also because it's Seattle and because it's part of the future of mobility in our shared space, a rain garden to manage stormwater. This is the last example from elsewhere before we get to Pittsburgh. And Portland is sort of streetcar city. They did build streetcars that changed the way that city operated. It really happened. They did, it changed the pattern of life. It allowed people not to need a car. It was a meaningful effort. It's not just a cliche. It is a system that really has affected development patterns combined with a very clear planning. Yes. But just to pause for a moment, Pittsburgh often, when I first came here, there was always this chatter, and I may have even said it myself, that Pittsburgh was like Portland. I stopped saying that because it's really not true, and because it's also really important to not look at it that way and to be sure that we actually focus on the things that are here as well. At a certain moment, we have to kind of put a pause on the compare and contrast default of looking to other cities. Portland, there are similarities. We actually have light rail. We don't really always acknowledge it, especially in the East End, because it's mostly elsewhere. But we actually have a lot of the kind of the food culture and stuff that Portland has. We don't have the maple bars that they do. In case you don't know what a maple bar is, it's a rectangular donut with a glaze, and quite a thing in Portland. But we don't have that, and that's okay. We are different. Also, I love that we get these great sort of best ofs, best food town, best tourist town, best this town. I love that stuff. I think it's important for the city, continues to be important. At the same time, it doesn't always help us think very clearly because it stops us from seeing what's in front of us in our own terms. And so I want to talk about that a little bit today. So, for Pittsburgh, I mentioned like 3 big themes about what I've begun to learn and what I hope to keep learning, and which I think is also perhaps a way for people to think about learning from where they live in another city, in another metropolitan region. And I'm going to look at it through the lens of mobility, of how we make places, but also how we are moving through them and the connection between that. This is Polish Hill, as probably many of you may know. I'm showing it because so much of the time in Pittsburgh, we think we can't do things. It's like, well, our streets are too steep. Our streets are too steep. They're too narrow. They do this, they do that. And we've got this crazy quilted development, which is monumental buildings and then little infill buildings. And, and also we lost 350,000 people. How is it ever going to work in kind of a way? How are we ever going to have mobility that's different than what we've got today? Here we've got this town that's on too steep a hill, this village, if you want to call it that, a neighborhood of Polish Hill, which is on what's just too steep to build on in a kind of contemporary terms, a lot of it. You just wouldn't build on it. But it's built, it's there, and it actually works. One little note I want to say, you will notice people sitting on a stoop, and I want to, about that, because when I'm talking about the relationship between the sort of where we move, that public realm, that right-of-way, and then also how we make places. And there's an amazing project that was done by Oliver Lake and many collaborators together with the Northside community and with the City of Asylum with this remarkable title, Stoop is a Verb. Now, does anyone know what to stoop is? Or stooping? Got any guesses? No? Okay, well, perhaps I'll do my best to share it with you. The point is, stooping is actually in the work that he was doing, working with a community quite far from Polish Hill, or 3 miles away, was that basically the way that people have a social interaction, kind of informal social events, and sort of that begin kind of on the stoop and just sort of become a sort of community network kind of activity. And that, I have noticed that in our city. I've learned about it. And I've also, one of the things that I always think about Pittsburgh is a city that so many places in America forgot how to be a city. Basically, everyone went inside, shut the doors, and hoped to never go out again until they moved to the suburbs. But Pittsburgh never actually stopped being a city. I mean, people never stopped doing the activities which are kind of normal in a neighborhood and normal where you actually want to see your neighbors and exchange and kind of do it in a way over time. And so, to me, I use the term history works. History doesn't always give us what we expect, but there's a history that works. It also, in a kind of this is the planners only section of the presentation. It also works in that the streets, it's kind of an accident that we didn't pave all our streets. We didn't really get around to paving all our streets. We don't really have the resources to pave all, off the record. One of the first things that happened to me in my job when I got here was that $500,000 removed from a budget that I had, and I was outraged, and then I learned it was for paving streets, and that still upset me because a year later I'm like, take it, we need to pave our streets. So I'm not the guy who's opposed to paving streets. I recognize the importance of it. But at the same time, it's this very interesting kind of historical accident that we have all those yellow brick roads, all those Belgian block roads, and then this one in a kind of very special portion of the city in shady side of the wood block street, which are hard to find. But these streets actually have some characters that contemporary scientists around the world are working to figure out how we can have streets that breathe, how we can have streets that have some permeability, how they can actually be part of the sponge of dealing with all the stormwater management we have to do. And if we don't we'll be spending unlimited billions of dollars on creating new infrastructure. This is an urgent public need. And so I find it fascinating that we're still, while the driver here is not permeability, this is really sort of that it's historic or that it's sort of or that we have a replacement rule and so forth. But we can learn from the fact that we didn't finish the asphalting of the city, and maybe we actually sort of lucked out in a way because we have some lessons both from the past as we also look to contemporary technologies. Now, another thing, the busway. Many of you may not send postcards home of the busway or celebrate it. There's probably not, we could have I think we're at let's see, where are we now? We'd be 25, 15, 40. So we're at about we're somewhere near the 40th anniversary of the busway. I'd like to give a party. I'll tell you why. The busways were a revolutionary idea. For planners, there's a world of Curitiba and Bogota, both famous for their bus rapid transit. Well, Curitiba did open in 1974, and our first busway, that's in Brazil, Bogota is in Colombia. Our first busway opened in 1977, but this was like an adaptive reuse of an existing infrastructure in the city, of a rail infrastructure that many aspects of it were redundant, and we could actually have rapid buses on it, which is a system that is the envy of cities around the world to have that opportunity. Have we used every aspect of this opportunity every way we could? Have we developed in relationship to it all the ways we could? Maybe not. But none of these are perfect. The point is that there are things that have happened here, that are used here, that are meaningful, not just for us, but actually meaningful as things to learn from for people from other cities. This is also, not every city had a bridge called a hot metal bridge, which had, I think it's 2,300 degree ingots of iron in a torpedo train, which if one drop of water fell on them, they would explode and blow up, 1/20th of Pittsburgh. And then turn it into a bike and ped bridge. That's something, again, now that this happened a few years ago, we sometimes take it for granted. Oh yeah, I can get across the south side here. But it is an amazing thing to reuse infrastructure with this type of intelligence and commitment to actually mobility and placemaking, which uses what we had rather than just invent something new. Similarly, the trails on the waterfront have been around so long since the Murphy administration that we sometimes take them for granted. But the fact is, these were every inch of our waterfront. There were like 3 inches that weren't. But almost every inch of our waterfront had railroads, industry, every kind of thing, the steel mills, et cetera. And using that transformation is still a lesson in terms of how we can actually use those edges that have been used for industry and so forth and transform them into a use that's both for commuting as well as for recreation. And so I use the term repurpose and retrofit. And here, I just want to talk about intermodal and intergenerational for a moment. We had 22 inclines at the height. Now we have 2. We had inclines that could do anything. That could take freight, that you could have a horse-drawn wagon come up on, that could take huge amounts of building material, that could unload ships that were docking on the Monongahela. But we've also have ones that today are intermodal in their own way, because you can actually take a bike on one of the inclines. Well, you can actually go on both, but it's an argument if you do. And we have a system that the point here again is like, yeah, we only have 2 inclines. Yeah, they're kind of just for tourists now. Some actually have a little more functionality, but that doesn't mean we have to think about them that way forever. That doesn't mean that we don't have something that is learning from Pittsburgh. Is like, how did we use it historically? How do we use it now? Even if it's only like 100 people who use it with a bike, but what is it? How does that really work? Because, yeah, maybe it's not part of a system now, but one, I wouldn't discredit things because tourists use them. I think that's, tourists are part of the city too. And then I also wouldn't discredit them because I think that they're just not connected to some transportation system. They may not be today, they could be in the future. And similarly with the steps. The steps, we have 700 throughout the city. Most are out, many are in bad shape. Some are like literally go to nowhere. I mean, Polish Hill is like, there's like 15 different flights that go to nowhere. But others do go somewhere. And others, people, whether it's in Greenfield or whether it's in Southside Slopes, people are recognizing that they can actually be restored, and they do it for themselves, frankly, with approvals ultimately. And they also, in this sketch here, their own representing how it actually is part of a system. That these sort of systems that were a different way of moving for the city, which were because a city that was before the auto, or before the wealth of everyone having an auto, and also had a specifically challenging topography, that there are places where it might not be an incline, but it might be stairs, and they're actually a meaningful part of a system. So just, history works, retrofit, repurpose, and repeat. Intermodal, intergenerational. We have a system that is a lot of times the best ways of kind of getting people from a bike to a path or a steps to an incline or a train or a bus to a what else could there be? A bus to a boat. How about that? A bus to a boat. They are, one of the nice things about them is they don't have to just be for the people who drive, which is still a limited portion of our population, both by age, capacity, and wealth. So, sort of a summary of some of the things that I've said today. The bike polo in Seattle, I'm sure there's already a dissertation written about it, and there should be. It was a self-organizing activity, self-organizing group behavior. There was nothing, it wasn't even on social media. It just emerged that the young and the restless of Seattle would show up on a beat-up old tennis court, though sometimes a little bit of basketball on that too, but a beat-up old tennis/basketball court in a park sort of near the, old days it was hipster, I don't know what it is now. But and they would start playing bike polo, which even the rules themselves are kind of only a social agreement. And so it was only a social agreement that got them there. The schedule of it was a social agreement. They had no permission from the city of any kind. Bad. But they did it. And they did it. And it was, all sorts of intelligent people like me, hopefully like me, or like other more intelligent people than me, looked at it and thought that this is really interesting phenomenon. And really interesting, in fact, because this is the human brain organizing stuff without any preset rules, actually figuring it out for themselves and making it work. And that's really and they had plenty of feedback loop. They got plenty both from themselves and their interactions, from the people that stood and watched, and ultimately from the city that said, you really can't do this, but ultimately a deal was worked out. But the Pittsburgh left, again, I am not endorsing Pittsburgh left. But the Pittsburgh left is actually a social behavior, which it reflects it's a group behavior. It is a sort of no one ever put out a book saying we're all going to do the Pittsburgh left now. There was never, no, they also didn't put out a book saying we're going to put our lawn chairs to hold our parking place. Also not endorsing that. But it's important to look at and take seriously in a way, because this is, if we're trying to change the way we make places and trying to change what mobility is in a city, and we're getting great ideas from around the world. We have, it's my job to help with the folks I work with and so many others and the people in this room to help a complete streets vision turn into complete streets practice in the city of Pittsburgh. And so we are getting great ideas from other cities. And we are getting great ideas, even if it's in sort of fun public space ideas like the parklet idea, where you roll down some AstroTurf instead of lawn chairs. You roll down some AstroTurf and create a little parklet where a parking area is. And those are very important, and I don't underestimate their value at all, as you know from the long compare and contrast section of this. But at the same time, we have to take seriously the stuff that's right in front of us and the practices that are right in front of us. Now, it may be that not all behaviors are good. Not all behaviors can survive, and they especially can't survive as the city becomes more mixed and it has a new population mixing with older population. Because if those unwritten rules aren't all shared, they can lead to a lot of havoc and unfortunate situations, as well as I'm not endorsing it. So but the key here is that even so, just as I want to learn from the busways, just as I want to learn from the inclines, just as I want to learn from the railroads that were turned into bike trails or into pedestrian trails, I think we have to learn from the way we do stuff now and the way we have done it, because our brains are actually remarkable at learning and remarkable at creating sort of behavior that isn't always from a rule book, but happens because of a number of decisions, of thousands, ultimately millions of decisions made in trying to arrive at a local solution pathway. And again, not all local solution pathways merit surviving, but at the same time, they're just like people who never forgot how to be on a stoop and enjoy their neighborhood, and just like the people who never forgot that you can actually use the steps to get up and to get into your neighborhood, and you don't always have to have a car, that those are things that we can learn from and adapt and use, and that's how we can actually be smart and move forward. Thank you.